The Winter Tree by Georgina Lewis. Read by Jill Greenacre. Chapter 18. The Earth. I think I was the first one to speak. Feeling foolish, I said brightly to cover my embarrassment, "Hello, Joseph. Nice to see you." There was a brief silence, and then he seemed to recollect himself and pull his thoughts together with an effort. He turned his eyes away from Hester and seemed at rather a loss. I looked at his face and my heart contracted at the misery there. "Sorry," he was muttering to himself. "I didn't mean to come." He shook his head as if to pull himself together. "She's back with you. I didn't know." His face was scarlet. A low tide of red suffused his skin, and beads of moisture stood along his lip. I looked from him to Hester. She had her head down low over the baby. Her lashes lay across her cheeks, shielding her eyes, but the hand that held the baby's blanket trembled like a branch when thunder threatens. Joseph was staring at the floor. He raised an arm and lightly brushed it across his eyes. There was a scrape and a thud as the pantry door opened, and Father emerged, sieve and piping in his hands. He stopped short when he saw Joseph. He nodded towards him, and Joseph nodded back like two silent puppets on strings. I could have laughed at them if I hadn't seen the misery in Joseph's eyes and the bleak look in Father's. Joseph turned to go. He put a bowl of brown eggs down on the table beside the sink, then hesitated for a moment. He stood there beside them, shuffling his feet awkwardly, looking as if he wanted to stay and go both at the same time. Father looked from one to the other of us, sensing some slight tension in the air, and said, "Tea, is there, Abby?" I nodded. "Have a cup of tea with us, Joseph. We'll all have one." He nodded his head. There never was a more silent man than Joseph, I reflected in exasperation, filling the kettle at the sink. Hester had finished feeding the baby by now and deftly rebuttoned her blouse. She put Elizabeth over her shoulder and began to pat her back softly to bring up the wind, crooning gently to her in a special voice she kept for Elizabeth alone. When I turned again, she had disappeared upstairs. We drank our tea in silence. I tried once to talk to Joseph, but his silence went deeper than words. I think deep as the earth. I sorely missed Mother's presence and light chatter. Once Joseph said awkwardly, "Sorry about your mother, Abby." And I glanced at Father. His face was heavy, set with a leaden look, and he began to talk jerkily to Joseph about the spring planting he was planning, the peas, leeks and beetroot, how much ground he was going to give to potatoes this year, as if to clear the thought of Mother from his mind. Joseph drank his tea and thanked me and got up to go. Hester had not reappeared. He went quickly and silently, stepping out of the door as if he was afraid something might detain him if he lingered, and I hardly had time to thank him for the eggs. I went with him to the gate. We said nothing as we walked up the path, but as he paused, his fingers trembled on the gatepost. "Thank you for the eggs, Joseph," I said, rather at a loss. He nodded. "Pleasure." Then he said, "She's back then?" "Yes," I said, "for a little while, on a visit. She gets very homesick over there in Truro. Do her good to have a holiday at home." It was what I'd planned to say to anyone who asked, and it seemed a useful enough thing to say to Joseph. There was silence for a moment. Above us, the light spring wind off the old hill caught in the trees and tossed the bright infant leaves and showered drops in spasms on our heads. "Is she happy?" he asked me. For answer, I shrugged lightly. "I don't know. I never know with Hester. I think she misses us a lot." He nodded, his eyes on the stones in the lane. "Looks like another shower, Abby." "Yes," I said, "it does." He lingered, seeming unwilling to go, and thanked me again for the tea. I glanced sideways at him. He turned and, looking at me full in the face for a moment, said, "She couldn't have married me, Abby." I knew not what to say. He took a piece of hawthorn, bright with flower, in his hands, then released it gently so that it swung back into the hedge with a little blossomy shudder. "And anyway," he said, "it's too late now." Then he turned on his heel and was off down the lane, turning only to wave me a brief goodbye. I went back into the kitchen to dish up dinner, conscious of a heaviness of heart that had not been there for weeks. Lissy came in from cleaning the pram, glowing with pride and hunger. Hester said very little. She made no reference at all to the extraordinary moment, but she was very quiet all through dinner. When Thomas came down from his bedroom and rushed up to tell her that his drawing of Elizabeth had been pinned up in a place of pride in the classroom, she smiled and said she was delighted. And when Lissy pleaded to be allowed to take Elizabeth out for her first walk in the spotless pram that afternoon, she nodded and said certainly. When I suggested going with them so that we could visit Mrs. Blamey and show her the baby, she smiled again. But the old enchanted look was back, and somewhere at the back of her eyes, behind the smiles and nods and acquiescence, was a new look of raw misery. May came and went, and with it news from Perrin. Jennifer was expecting twins, the doctor thought, and they were both delighted at the prospect. She was keeping very well, but finding it difficult to get about much, being so big with 2 babies. But they would let us know the moment there was news, and for the moment they both sent their love to us all, and Jenny would be glad of any outgrown clothes that Hester could spare for the babies, money being rather short. Hester packed her up a multitude of little vests and nightdresses, shawls and bibs, and took them to the post office in the pram. "But Hester," I said, "won't you need them again one day? Perhaps—" I trailed off lamely. She looked at me with that curious, pitying look I remembered and said, "No, Abby, don't be silly. I shall never have another child." "But you don't know for sure," I said a little helplessly. "You don't know what might happen." "Oh, yes, I do," she said quietly, in a remote voice I had heard so often lately. "I know exactly what will happen." I shrugged and let her post them off to Jennifer, who wrote back straight away to say how delighted she was to get them all. Jennifer wrote a cheerful letter, full of details of their arrangement for the twins, how excited they both were, and Sam too, and that Perrin sent his love, and to tell me not to forget my promise about Richard. "Promise?" said Lissy in surprise, putting down the letter. "What did you promise him, Abby? What did you promise him about Richard?" "Oh, nothing," I said lightly. "It was only a bit of fun anyway. We were only joking. Perrin wanted me to ask them here to tea with a friend of theirs." "The one who came before?" "Why, yes," I said. "He came while I was away. Do you remember him, Lissy?" Surprisingly, she went very red and said yes, she remembered him well, for Perrin had brought him home after the Peel, and they'd had a cup of tea, and he'd liked her chocolate cake a great deal, and had eaten 3 pieces. "Then if Richard comes," I told her, "you must make another cake for him to sample. Perhaps a sponge or saffron the next time." She laughed and blushed again, and went off into the garden in search of Hester and the baby, covered in confusion. I put Jennifer's letter thoughtfully down on the dresser, and wrote back 2 or 3 days later to say that of course we'd like them all to come to tea, perhaps after the twins were born and Father feeling a bit better. Father was still worrying us. He had begun to complain of strange aches and pains now and again, of heaviness in his hands, and he seemed very weary all the time. He still sat in the woodshed on his own for hours on end, but hardly ever tried to play his violin. Once or twice we heard him tuning it, and once a little feeble sound of music came winding down between the trees, but after it a sudden sliding note, then silence. On a June morning, heavy with the scent of blossom, I took my shopping basket and set out with Thomas to walk the 5 miles or so across the footpath to our nearest town. We set off up the lane towards the hill ahead of us. All fair and innocent it looked in the crystal light. We climbed the steep lane up towards the church and met the vicar coming out of the vicarage gate. "Good morning, Abigail," he greeted me warmly, shaking hands. "And young Thomas too. No school this morning, Thomas?" "Oh no, of course, it's Saturday. How foolish of me. I see that you are both off for a walk. How very pleasant. My, it really is a splendid morning, isn't it? It makes one feel quite glad to be alive under the good Lord's heaven. How is your father, my dear?" He frowned and nodded thoughtfully. "Still finding life a little difficult to come to terms with? Just a little better? Oh, I really am delighted to hear that. And Hester, of course, has no doubt returned to Truro by now." "She has not? Dear me, dear me." He hesitated. "I wonder, Abigail, I wonder if you could spare me a few minutes of your time this morning. But perhaps you could pop back home with me for a moment. I will not detain you long. I rather wanted to have a word with you about your young cousin." "Oh," I said guardedly. "Well, of course. Take the basket, Thomas, and wait for me in the churchyard." No," he said. "Bring the young man with you. This little matter will not take more than a minute, I assure you. No doubt we can find him a chocolate biscuit or two to while away the time. You'd like that, wouldn't you, young man?" Thomas nodded politely, although he was not a boy greatly swayed by chocolate biscuits as a general rule. The vicar led us through the hall to the small room at the back of the house that he used as a study, and sat me down on a wooden chair so highly glazed with polish that I feared I might slide off it if I didn't concentrate, and offered chocolate biscuits from a tin. "No, thank you," I said, though Thomas might. "Wait outside, Thomas. You could go into the garden and draw the vicar's trees." The vicar blinked slightly, as if Thomas might possibly be contemplating drawing sap from tree trunks with a knife, and then he brightened and said, "Oh, yes, of course. I hear you like to sketch, young man. Do you carry paper and pencils with you? Oh, I see that you do. Yes, by all means, go and sketch whatever takes your fancy. There is a fine old oak beside the south fence, a magnificent specimen, several 100 years old. It would make an excellent subject." He crossed to the window and stood looking out, then went on in his gentle scholarly voice. "My wife planted daffodils beneath it several years ago, and they are a perfect picture in the spring. They're over now, of course, but the roses are splendid at this time of year. Do you care for sketching flowers, Thomas? My wife is very proud of our pelargoniums. We have a magnificent display outside our kitchen window." He waved through his little study window, and I followed his eyes. "My wife is out there now, weeding them. Why don't you go along and say good morning to her?" When Thomas had obeyed, munching chocolate biscuits with his free hand cupped beneath them to catch stray crumbs, the vicar turned to me. "Now," he said brightly, "how are you, my dear?" "Me? I'm very well, thank you," I said. I waited. He caught his hands together and walked up and down for a moment, as if unsure of how to begin. "You wanted to ask me about Hester," I told him helpfully. "Ah, yes," he said carefully. "Hester, Mrs. Penkevin." I looked at my hands. "Yes, Mrs. Penkevin." "She's, still with you then?" "Yes," I said, "she's still with us." "Abigail," said the vicar earnestly, "may I speak to you frankly? I feel I've known you long enough to do so, my dear. I hesitate. I have an abhorrence of intrusion, but I feel in this case it is my duty to—" He made a fist with one hand and tapped it gently upon the other one and peered thoughtfully out of the window. "To intervene in a situation which I fear is causing great unhappiness." "You mean to David?" "Yes, to young David." He paused. "Hester has been with you since April. It is now June. Tell me, Abigail, when is she intending to return to her husband?" There was a little silence. "I don't know," I said. "She's very happy with us. I don't think she wants to go back just yet." "But, Abigail, she is his wife. She surely cannot intend to remain with you for much longer. Have you spoken to her about returning?" "No, I thought she'd want to go back before now, but she hasn't mentioned it." "Forgive me, my dear, but yours does seem a somewhat casual attitude. Should you not be making some attempt to persuade her, even to put some pressure upon her?" "Pressure?" I asked him. "What sort of pressure?" He cleared his throat. "Well, really, child, you must surely know the kind of argument likely to appeal to her. Duty, love, their mutual happiness." "I don't think Hester was very happy with David," I said awkwardly. There was another silence. He stood at the window looking out and rocking a little from his toes to his heels, backwards and forwards. Then he said pensively, "Her parents, Abigail, who were they? Somehow I have never felt it my place to inquire from your father. I rather expected him to acquaint me with the basic facts when Hester first came to live with you some years ago, but he has never volunteered the information. Do you have any idea? Were they local folk? Do you remember them? Were they relatives, perhaps? I believe Hester is your father's niece, is she not?" "Yes," I said, "but I don't know much more. At least I know who her mother was, but I never met her. I don't think Mother did either. Her mother was Father's younger sister." "And her father?" "I've no idea at all. Father will never talk about him. I suppose she must have been illegitimate or something. He nodded thoughtfully. Quite so, quite so. No doubt you're probably right. She is a quite extraordinarily beautiful girl, Abigail. A fascinating child, but rather disturbing. I find her somewhat of an enigma. She has a curious air of tragedy about her, an oddly worrying quality that I cannot quite define. Yes, I said, I know what you mean. A sort of sadness. A sadness, yes, but something more than that. I mean a strange quality of emptiness, as if some part of her were missing. Am I making sense to you? I wonder if I'm imagining things. My wife tells me sometimes that I'm becoming rather forgetful. My spectacles, for instance, seem rather elusive of late, as if they had a personality of their own and they were wilfully avoiding me. He chuckled. Encroaching old age, no doubt. It comes to us all. But I do not think I am unperceptive with people. Quite the contrary. I find increasing age and experience leads one to see certain things more clearly. It is as if the faculty of insight becomes sharpened. The appearance one presents to the world becomes more rigid, routine becomes comforting, and tradition precious. He paused and tapped lightly on the windowsill with his fingertips, looking out. But as life withdraws one's physical efficiency, it appears to substitute a certain capacity for clear-sightedness. It is a source of constant amazement to me how life continually surprises one. Forgive me, Abigail. How can I expect a child of 20 to understand? To return to Hester, she is not a happy young person. No, I said, she is not happy. Does she wish to have the child baptised, do you know? I wonder she has not mentioned the subject to me, but then we do not often see her at church these days. I think she finds it difficult to come, with the baby still so young. Quite so, he said. It must be very difficult, no doubt. But mention it to her, would you, Abigail? I should very much like to baptise Hester's little daughter. Yes, I said, I'll mention it to her. And will you perhaps suggest to her that she gives her marriage vows a little thought? I hear that David has been most unhappy these past few months. Tell me, has he made any attempt to see her? No, none at all. He never writes to her, not even to ask after the baby. And she to him? No, I thought as much. But some effort is necessary on her part, Abigail. Would you not agree? One cannot make a marriage in the sight of God and just walk out of it a few months later, simply because one finds one prefers things as they were beforehand. I would be very grateful if you would have a word or two with Hester, my dear. Grateful and reassured. He hesitated, then said carefully, To be perfectly frank with you, I feel a little disappointed that she has not come to me herself. So often these little things can be straightened out with a word or two in the right direction. A question of setting one's feet back on the straight and narrow, as it were. So do speak to Hester about returning to David. Please assure her that I am here, should she want somebody to confide in. I am almost always in. Ah, yes, that reminds me. Have you had news from your brother yet? Perrin? No, not yet. We expect to hear any day. You probably know Jennifer's expecting twins. Twins, my dear! How simply splendid! Dear me, how delighted your mother would have been, poor soul! A most remarkable woman, your mother, Abigail. I expect you miss her sorely. Yes, we do. Yes, of course you do. He sighed. Well, I must not detain you any longer, my dear. I shall be down to see your father tomorrow as usual. I'm so glad to hear he's feeling just the slightest bit more cheerful. Please give him our regards in the meantime. Oh, I see your young brother found himself a subject. My wife, weeding in her Wellingtons, it appears. He waved through the window, and his wife looked up and waved back. He tapped on the glass and signalled to Thomas, and I waved too, indicating that I was ready to leave. The vicar shook my hand. Thank you, my dear, he said earnestly. I feel considerably reassured now that we have had our little chat. I'm sure you can persuade Hester to return to David and her wifely duties, but in your own words, of course. Young people have their own jargon, naturally. We had our own in my day. One's elders seem so hopelessly out of touch, so painfully old-fashioned. At the end of June, we heard from Perrin that Jennifer had had twin boys. They called them Philip and Thomas for their uncle, and it did seem a very strange thing to Thomas that he had both a niece and two nephews now. The babies were good weights, Jennifer wrote from hospital, and very well behaved. The nurses said they never woke for feeding in the night, and she was hoping they would be the same at home. Father seemed to brighten a little at the news, and for several days appeared more interested in life. He pottered about in the pantry with his wine and went out more into the garden to dig and weed. Hester was very subdued. She worked hard in the cottage, cleaning everything in sight and doing endless washing. I tried several times to get her to talk to me about her plans, but each time she only went very quiet, and a bleak look came into her eyes when I mentioned David. The vicar's request rang in my ears at night, and to salve my conscience I brought up the subject. She said she did not want the baby christened yet. Perhaps in a few months she would feel ready to think about it, but not yet. But Hester, I said tentatively, what about David's wishes? Don't you think that he ought to be consulted? I paused. When are you thinking of going back to him? I said it quite casually, but she jumped and turned upon me, eyes wide, with what looked suspiciously like fear. Go back to him, she echoed. Well, yes, I said rather helplessly. Don't you want to, Hester? Don't you miss him? She said nothing, so I took a deep breath and went on. He must miss Elizabeth dreadfully, and you even more. You've been here for 3 months now, and you said you only wanted to stay here for a little while. Do you want me to go away, Abby? Well, of course not. We love having you here at home. But Hester, your place is with David. He's your husband, after all. You do love him, don't you? Yes, I love him, but I can't go back to him. Not yet, anyway. But Hester, that doesn't make sense. Surely if you love him, you must want to be with him. She shrugged. I suppose so. Then why don't you write to him and tell me that you want to go home? Ask him to come here on the train and fetch you and Elizabeth. She looked at me. You don't understand anything really, do you, Abby? I felt slapped and rather breathless. I turned away, suddenly hurt. Oh, Abby, she said immediately. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. Please forgive me. It's just I can't go back. I can't bear it if I'm not here. Nothing is real with David. Can't you understand? You said that before, I answered in bewilderment. I don't understand what you mean about realness. Everything is real. How can living with David be less real than living here with us? I can't explain. Is there something you haven't told me, Hester? She looked at me, her eyes wary. Like what? Like David's parents? Was there a row? No row, not exactly. But they don't like me, Abby, if that's the sort of thing you mean. Still, I suppose that doesn't matter. Thousands of people probably don't like their in-laws. Do they know that David is living there without you? She shrugged again. I don't know, I imagine so. She sighed. I wish he'd married Veronica Braze and left me alone. But Hester, you didn't have to marry him. You accepted him happily enough at the time. Yes, she said, I know. That was before I realised. Realise what? Oh, nothing. Realise what it would mean. I thought everything would be all right with David once we were married, that it would all be real. Don't you know what I mean, Abby? I can't explain it any other way. There aren't any proper words. It's just a sort of nothingness all the time. Oh, I wish you understood, Abby. I can talk to you more than to anyone else, but even you don't seem to know what I mean. Don't you ever feel that things aren't real? No, I said helplessly. Is it a sort of acting feeling, like people do when they're shy or frightened or something, and don't want anyone to realise? I suppose we all do that. She shook her head. No, it's not like that at all. It's as if everything is a dream and not really happening. As if I keep waiting to wake up all the time and I never do. Like a nightmare? No, not particularly horrible. Just not real. You said some things are real. What things? She hesitated and caught her hands together. I looked down at them, at the thin brown hands, at the gold band upon her finger. There are moments, that's all. What sort of moments? You must try, Hester. You must try to tell me. It might help. Now come on, tell me. What moments have been real to you? She shivered, although the afternoon was warm. She took a deep breath. A long time ago I thought it was getting better. I got them quite a lot, the real times. Just for a few minutes, but quite often. Sometimes even as much as once a week. I began to experience a slight sense of panic. This was something quite beyond me. "Would it help to talk to the vicar?" I said at last. "He wants you to go up there and talk to him whenever you want to confide in someone." She looked at me in astonishment. "The vicar? Whatever for? He couldn't do anything, Abby. Don't be silly." "Sorry," I said shortly, "but he's a lovely man, Hester, and very willing to help." She looked at me. "To help," she said. "Help what? How horrible, Abby. You've been discussing me with the vicar." "No, I haven't, I promise you. He only wants you to know he's there if you should want to go and talk to him about anything that's worrying you. And he asked me to tell you he'd be very pleased to christen Elizabeth if you wanted it done." "Well, I don't," she said abruptly. "I didn't mean to offend you, Hester. I'm sorry." Quite unexpectedly, she smiled. "Dear Abby," she said, "you're trying so hard, aren't you? But there's nothing to worry about, really. Just promise me you won't try to make me go away before I'm ready to. I'll go one day, I promise you. One day when I find out." "Find out?" I asked her. "Find out what?" But she wouldn't answer me, and only said, "I'll find out one day soon. Sometimes I think it's very near. Sometimes I can almost hear it, like a voice calling me." "When do you hear it?" I asked her curiously. "Oh, sometimes when the wind blows from the hill, I hear it in the wind. It's strange, Abby, very strange, but it's the only thing that is real, almost, and that ever has been." "You said almost, Hester." "Yes, I said almost." She looked down. "Do you hear it at other times? Do you hear it in the church? I remember once in the empty church you said you were listening, but there was nothing there that I could hear. Did you hear it then?" She nodded. "Yes, I often hear it in there, when it's empty, and in the churchyard, mostly in the winter when it's cold. It's like a sort of music, Abby, and yet it's not sound. It's almost like a scent inside my mind. I can't describe it any other way." She turned away from me, and I watched her helplessly. "It sometimes happens when I'm hungry, and often when I'm cold, but it's real and wonderful when it happens. In a way, it's the only thing that ever has been real." She paused, and then she said quietly, so quietly that I almost couldn't hear her, "Sometimes I think it's getting nearer, and that I'll hear it quite clearly soon, like I did that once, long, long ago." "When was that?" I asked her gently. "When else did you hear it?" "When he touched me. Once, when he put his hands on my arms here." She held her arms on either side. "He made me so unhappy because he wouldn't speak to me then. I knew it'd be too late if he didn't." The realness went away straight afterwards. "He?" I asked. And then I remembered a patch of amber light touching the stone church floor in the fading dusk of childhood. And I remember too the top of the tower, the ground perilously distant, and Joseph's hands upon her shoulders. And I said, oh dear, I was afraid of that." "I don't think I've ever been happy since that day," she said. "It's much older than wanting to be his wife or anything like that. It goes back and back millions of years until before the world began. It's terrible, Abby." She turned back to face me, her hand against the light from the window so that I could not see her face. "What he means to me is terrible. It's a dreadful, tearing rawness that started 1,000,000 years ago deep in the heart of a son, and I shall never be free of it, not now, not ever. Even when I am dead I shall lie in his arms, and I would die, I know I would, if he ever should touch me again. He is the stuff of which I am made, and what I cannot understand at all is why I cannot bear it." "Oh, Hester," I said helplessly, "what can I say?" "Nothing at all," she answered. "There's nothing to be said. There's nothing in this world that can mend it now, not ever. I know that. I love David very much, and I might have been happy with him if it hadn't been for that. As it is, I can never be free now." She smiled at me, turning slightly so that the light from the window fell across her cheek. "But you have helped me, Abby, much more than you know. All of you have helped me. Even Perrin, even though he hates me." I stared at her. "Perrin?" I said, amazed. Perrin doesn't hate you, Hester. Whatever makes you think that? Oh, yes, he does, she said softly. He always has done. I knew it long ago. When you've lived with hate for all those years, like I did as a child before I came to live with you, you recognise it when it's there. Poor Perrin doesn't know he hates me, but he does. She sighed and turned away again. Don't talk about my problem anymore. It's a waste of time, but I'm glad you know the truth, at least as much as I do anyway. You're very dear to me, like a sister, and Auntie Susan was like a mother. I never knew a mother could be like that. She smiled at me in the falling light. Thank you, Abby, for everything you've done. I couldn't possibly have had a better sister. That August, Thomas was 12. Father made him a little easel out of wood, one that he could fold up and carry about with him. Lucy and I managed to scrape a little money together from the sale of Father's strawberries to buy him some paints. We bought water paints in 5 or 6 basic colours, and Perrin sent a huge book of special painting paper as a present from the twins to their Uncle Thomas. Thomas set it all up in his little bedroom, the one that had been Perrin's, and discovered painting. He had always been a quiet boy and never any trouble, and now he became almost invisible. He still went to play with Toby Tregulla on occasions, and Toby came to us for tea now and again, but there was a self-contained quality about Thomas that seemed to make him different from most other children. When Toby wanted to play robbers in the woods, Thomas was only interested in painting the trees. When Toby wanted to make catapults to fire at the wood pigeons in the orchard, Thomas wanted to draw him whittling wood. When Toby wanted to go tadpoling or look for slow worms on the hill, Thomas wanted to draw what they found, and only went with him on the condition that he could keep the creatures as models and let them go afterwards. It must have been very frustrating for Toby, and it was remarkable that any friendship flourished at all. They struck strange bargains with each other. Thomas agreed to swap his elf bolt and the stone with a hole in it in exchange for half an hour of drawing Toby's bare feet. Thomas did Toby's homework for him several times in exchange for a whole hour of Toby's hands held out before him to reveal the physiology of his knuckles, the chewed fingernails, and even a wart or two. I once caught them in the outhouse, sitting side by side on the floor, with Toby groaning at having to wear a rubber band round his wrist until the blood vessels of his hands stood out like knotted string so that Thomas could draw his veins, and Thomas muttering, "Keep still. How can I get it right if you don't keep still?" in intense irritation. Our friendship with Joseph now seemed a very distant memory. Occasionally I would come across evidence of his presence in the lanes. Clouds of his tobacco smoke rising in the still air and drifting away from where he'd been like aromatic phantoms, but of Joseph himself there was rarely any sign. Occasionally, too, he'd send us eggs by way of Lissy, giving them to her as she passed his gate. Very occasionally he brought them himself, great pearly brown ones in a little basket, but he never came into the cottage at all, and by some mysterious method of his own always managed to arrive when Hester was out with baby Elizabeth up on the hill behind the church or visiting Polly Tregulla. Hester had become quite friendly with Polly. Polly's 3-year-old would play for hours with little Elizabeth in the garden. I was glad for Hester to have a friend with whom she probably had something in common, even if it was only teething problems and rusks and nappy rash. It was on one such October day, when Hester was at Polly's, that Joseph came, and this time he did come indoors. He brought, as usual, eggs. He came shouldering into the kitchen, wiping his feet self-consciously and glancing about as if to reassure himself that there was no one there but Thomas and me, although he must have known it, for he would have seen Hester and Lissy go off along the lane down to the cottages with Elizabeth in Polly's huge old pram not half an hour before. "Well, Joseph," I said, "come in, do. Will you stay for a cup of tea? There's only Thomas and me here. The others are out, and Father's up in his shed. Do you want to see him? He's not playing or anything. Go up there if you like." "Nope," said Joseph. "No, Abby, I won't go up there." Thomas looked up absently from his sketchbook and gave Joseph a brief grin. Joseph, equally silent, returned it. I sighed. It looked like being a somewhat laboured occasion, but in this I was to be proved wrong. "Did you say yes to tea, Joseph?" I asked him. He nodded. He sat down and put the eggs before him, pushing the basket carefully into the centre of the table. Thomas's eyes alighted upon them at once. He seized his pencil and pad and began to draw. The basket work first, the intricacy of woven willow cane, the frayed edges of the basket, the plaited border worn and battered, and in contrast, above the wickerwork, the bland serenity of smoothly contoured eggs, pearly and glistening, voluptuous of line. He worked swiftly and surely, his grubby, youthful hands holding the pencil and moving over the paper with a confidence beyond his years. Joseph watched him intently. Thomas worked his pencil about, flicking in shadows here, a touch of depth there, building up the shapes until the thing was finished, and the pencil drawing sat there on the paper, vigorous, with a life all of its own. He went to put the pad away and reach out for his tea, but Joseph stopped him. He held out his hand and said firmly, "Let me see it, Thomas." Thomas shrugged good-naturedly and passed the drawing over. He never minded being asked to show his work. He never minded us ignoring it either. It was the execution of the thing that mattered to him. If Lissy admired a drawing of washing hanging on the line, or Hester shrugged off a sketch of Elizabeth's fat little body in the bath, it was all the same to Thomas. I looked at his hands, small and brown on the table before him, holding the pencil. I looked from them to Joseph's hands, holding the sketch pad, the firm kindliness of them, the square, blunt nails. He was frowning at the drawing. For one moment I was afraid that criticism from Joseph, of all people, might just this once upset Thomas. I glanced at him. His square, still infant face, with its smattering of freckles, was alive with anxiety, his mouth tight drawn along its length. I realised with some surprise that Thomas cared what Joseph thought of his work. For a long while Joseph said nothing. Then he looked up and said quietly, "I didn't know you liked to draw like this." Thomas looked down at the paper, flushed and nodded, and then tucked the page away. He drank his tea and then went off with his sketch pad into the garden, leaving Joseph and me alone. "Well, Abby," he said at length, then nothing else. Once again I was aware of that strange facility of his for silence. We sat there pleasantly, drinking our tea and saying nothing. I wondered what he thought about. From time to time I glanced at him surreptitiously. A multitude of subjects fled through my mind, and all of them impossible. Hester, mother's death, father, Perrin, Thomas, but Hester uppermost. When he spoke at last, though, it was not of Hester at all, nor of mother, but instead he said musingly, with his eyes on the sky outside the window, "I remember, Abby, that little chap, a baby tied into its chair." And I remember too, a day long ago, at just this time of year, of dinner in the orchard under the trees. I said, "You carried Lizzie and me around on your shoulders, and Mother made you put us down for fear we'd hurt you." They were happy days, Abby, he said, and I wondered then if they were the happiest days he had known, and realised with a sense of shock that they probably were. 11 years ago, I said. He looked slightly startled. "Only 11? Seems to me like 40. I wondered if he was remembering the day when Hester came. There was a long silence in the room. Around us the familiar things of home stood safe and square in their long-appointed places. The old backward dresser, the boot from Plymouth, the nail in the wall with the calendar of colourful Scotland hanging from it, the rag-work rug before the stove, the mugs and cups and plates along the dresser shelves, Father's Wellingtons, that Lizzie wore to pull rhubarb, under the sink on the windowsill, Thomas's school photograph and a bunch of nappy pins. It must have seemed to Joseph, as it did then to me, that he was woven into the fabric of our home, part of the pattern of it, belonging to it, and yet with no rightful place. And suddenly I was seized with a quiet, grievous pain that this dear man I loved just like a brother had no place here in our home, because the girl he should have married had married someone else. Up in the orchard I could hear Thomas singing to himself, a funny little made-up song in that self-absorbed way he had. Distant birdsong filtered into us through the windows. A blackbird called from a tree of dying leaf, a late song monotonous with purity. Across the silent room, empty of all the loved ones of our family, but full of their resonance, Mother, father, Hester, and the children we had been, young and old, baby and child, all gathered there accusingly. Invisible eyes looked at Joseph, who had not spoken when he should have done. And suddenly it all seemed to me a simple tragic matter of his silence and reserve. Silent as the earth was Joseph, the deep earth in which small things struggle, and a seed is born, and a dream may die in the darkness. And there in the kitchen, within the silent presence of all that I held dear, I could have wept for him.